go big or go home. I love that saying, and in this video, I'm gonna talk about some of the tips, tricks, and the equipment that you might need for running oversized loads. So stick around. Now, I haven't been running oversized loads necessarily for all that long, so if this is something that you do, if this is your area of expertise, if something that I miss, I don't cover, or if you have other tips, please leave a comment down below and share out these golden nuggets for some of the newer truck drivers. I'm sure they would greatly appreciate it. So make sure that you check out those comments, guys, and leave one of those comments if you have some knowledge that maybe I don't cover, or even if I say something that's wrong. You know, I certainly don't know everything, but I'd appreciate your help on this. And if you get some type of enjoyment or knowledge out of this video, please don't forget to give it a like. The first thing that you're going to need to do is to double check your permits. They're going to email them to you, and the first thing that you need to do is open them all up, check all of the information for accuracy. If any of that information is wrong, then you could be looking at some serious fines. Now, it's nothing that's difficult. This is just something that you need to do. You know, I've ran probably, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 oversized loads, so really not very much at all. And on 2 different loads, I actually had to go back to my permit providers and get them to reissue some permits that, you know, the dates were messed up or some information on there was messed up. So double checking your permits, definitely the first place to start. Second thing that I highly encourage, and you kind of need to do this before you start running oversized loads, is get yourself a printer. And I don't know, I think I spent maybe $100 on my printer, something like that, and I can actually print directly from my phone. It's a Bluetooth printer. It's great. Not only do you get to use them for these oversized loads and printing out your permits, you can also use them for, you know, printing out your permits and things that you have to renew on a yearly basis. It's just a good thing to have as a truck driver. So in general, if you're not even necessarily an open deck guy, you might want to grab yourself a printer just in case. But getting yourself a printer and printing out those permits every single time is going to be beneficial to you. Some of the states do allow an electronic permit, but in one of the loads that I ran before, the website told me that an electronic permit would be fine. I rolled into the scale house, and turns out that was not fine. You actually had to print the permit out, have the physical copy, as well as sign it. And some of the states require you to not only have that physical copy, but you also have to have the directions, and there's many things that you need to have printed out in your possession in order to be legal to go through some of the states. So to just make life easier, get yourself a printer. After you've double checked your permit for accuracy, you want to make sure that you read the permit thoroughly. Read it thoroughly, because all the states have different requirements. Yes, it would be so much easier if they would just all get together and they would all have a set of rules that just applies to everybody, but that's not the case. So you need to make sure that you read the permits thoroughly. You know, some of the states, like Texas, for instance, their directions are insane. I was on a load running all the way across Texas, and I was on 10 different roads, but I had a page and a half of directions, if I remember correctly. It was crazy, but you gotta make sure that you read the permits thoroughly for the directions, for the requirements, for lights, for flags, for running at night, for when you can run. You know, some states you can run 30 minutes before sunset, some it's 30 minutes after, some it's at sunrise, sunset. So you gotta read these permits very thoroughly, because you don't want to get fines and you don't want to get CSA points for absolutely zero reason. So read them thoroughly. Something I highly encourage you to get is one of these. Now, you can find this in some of the truck stops. It's not going to be all, so you're going to have to, you know, kind of look at it, or you can just order one off of Amazon. That's probably the easiest thing to do. But it's an oversized load and pilot car directory. They do update this. I have volume 14, which is 2019 to 2020, and it's best to have one of these, because on some of those permits, it's not going to tell you precisely what you need as far as flags and lights are concerned. This goes into more detail, and it's going to have all of the different states on it. It's even got, you know, pilot services that advertise. It's just a good book to have. I think it was 15 bucks, so it's not that bad. There are websites out there as well, but I'm not exactly the most trusting when it comes to the internet. I mean, refer back to the electronic permit versus physical permit thing. That could have gotten me in trouble if the DOT officer, you know, if he was having a bad day. Could have easily written me a ticket for it, because technically my permit wasn't valid. So get yourself one of these, and it's going to make your life a lot easier. One of the things that you're definitely going to want to do, especially once you start getting into kind of the larger size stuff, like anything that's over about 12 wide, you're definitely going to want to start doing this. Over height requirements, or over height, it requires you to do this anyway, so you might as well, when you start running oversized loads that are under 12 wide, maybe some overlinked stuff, you want to start checking the routes for construction zones. And now, the majority of the time, you know, the permits are going to be pretty accurate. You know, they're going to route you around construction zones, but at the same time, you just never know. And there are construction zones that maybe weren't reported. You know, they're starting at the beginning of their work. For whatever reason, your permits are not always 100% accurate, and it's not up to the state to put you on the correct routing. It's actually on the driver. Almost all the permits actually state that. So it's on you. If you happen to go roll up on a construction zone, it may be on you. You might have to shut down to get a permit reissued, and then you may be down for days. So to save yourself this hassle, this time, go ahead and look at all of the different states. I believe you can go to, it's generally on the DOT websites, Department of Transportation's websites for these different states, and all of the construction zones will be posted there. Double check your route for accuracy. That way you're not shut down for days, or you don't get yourself into a pretty serious bind. Now, speaking of directions, this one, it kind of seems like common sense, but at the same time, there's a little bit extra that goes along with it, and that is follow your directions exactly. And I mean exactly. If they route you off the interstate to have you run down the feeder road for 1 mile and then get back on, just do it. You know, even if you don't see a cop there, you never know. They could be hiding out and waiting for you. And if you're out of route, there's no permit, then oh man, I mean, the fines can get astronomical, especially when dealing with overweight stuff. But follow your directions exactly. And if you accidentally make the wrong turn, or if you get off route, stop. Do not proceed, just stop. And then try to figure it out. Call your dispatcher. If you're independent, call, you know, the permits, or the permit company that you're dealing with. Call your permit department, call safety. Call whoever it is that you need to call, but make all of the phone calls, and don't just keep driving. If you just keep driving, that's just gonna put you in a much worse situation, and you definitely don't wanna go there. So, yeah, you screwed up, but now it's just time to own it. Just stop, make your proper phone calls, don't continue on. Try and follow those directions exactly. And before we get into the actual equipment, there's one more tip that I want to say, and this pertains to kind of the smaller oversized stuff. You know, this is going to exclude overweight, and I'm unsure about over height. I don't think that over height, you know, it's basically the over dimensional stuff. I don't think that necessarily jacks up the pricing of the permits, but when you start talking overweight, that's when the permits start to get really expensive. You start to get into the super load stuff, 15 wide plus. I think the permits kind of go up there as well. And then of course, when you need escorts, even if it's just pilot cars, or if you need police escorts, that's when the price really starts to get expensive. But you know, all of that pricing is definitely built into the loads, so it's not like you're losing money there. you're definitely making really good money to do this stuff. The more you specialize, the more money you're going to make. But when we're talking about just kind of over width stuff that's not necessarily too long, I think if it keeps you under 75 feet total, correct me if I'm wrong, but things of that nature, as a quick reference, when you call on a load, try to figure out how many states you're going to wind up going through. And let's say if you go through 6 states, multiply that by 50 bucks. 6 times 50 is $300. You can assume that your permits will be $300 as long as you don't need any kind of escort and you're not doing overweight stuff. That gives you a quick reference when dealing with the brokers and agents. That way you can make that quick fire decision. That way you don't lose the load. Sometimes your permits are going to be a lot cheaper. You know, if you're doing oversized in Texas, it's generally $61.61. And then, you know, places like Tennessee, it's per mile. So they range kind of widely. And a lot of times that $50 per state, you're going to be a little bit higher than what your permits are actually going to be. So if you just use that as a quick reference, it's going to give you an idea. That way you can make that quick decision when you're on the phone. So let's talk about some equipment. And let's start with the obvious. Oversized signs. Big surprise, right? You're going to need 2. You're going to need 2, and I believe they have to be at least 18 inches tall. I think that covers you for all states. But yeah, 2 of these. Now, if you have a flat chrome bumper, I highly recommend that for the front, you get the magnets. And you're gonna have to double check because I don't know off the top of my head, but I do know that the lettering actually has to be a certain height. So check into that before you start buying the magnets, but highly recommend those. These are kind of a pain to deal with. And then on top of that, I get a lot of flack for, you know, my license plate being zip tied to the grill here. But it's all that I can do. I don't want to have to move that around constantly whenever I have to hang my signs. So I just have it zip tied to my grill. But if you have those magnets, you have that flat chrome bumper, then you can get away with that. You don't need it. But unfortunately, I don't. I have the fiberglass bumper, so I have to use bungees to hook mine up to the front. And then in the back, a lot of times I'll have to build a small header board to put it on, or I attach it to the freight. Now, you can get in trouble for attaching it to the freight because technically this sign needs to be towards the back, but rarely, if ever, are you actually going to get cited for that. But you know, here's the warning: you can get in trouble for that, so I don't advocate it, but it is something that we do out here. So get yourself some oversized signs. Now you need to have your flags up here in the front, and for me, I really like these type of flags because they hook in nicely. You have to mount this bracket, so be careful if you have fiberglass. I've been told that these brackets will actually rip out of the fiberglass going down the road, and I would imagine if you're doing oversized loads all of the time, that's probably the case. But for me, I don't run exclusive oversized loads, so my flags aren't necessarily hanging all of the time. But I really love this flag. It's great. I do take it down at night because I don't want anybody to get sticky fingers. And it's really easy to take on, or to put on and take off, just like so. And you don't have to worry about them going anywhere. They're a little bit more expensive than the others, but they are higher quality, so they do last longer. These are the flags I like for up front. Now back here in the back, I have this bracket here, and it allows me to basically just stick this flag down inside, and that's where it hangs. Now, I'm gonna talk about flags when you're actually flagging the load, and I've moved away from using this stick. This stick has flown out on me before, so what I'll do is I'll take a zip tie, and I'll zip tie around the bottom underneath this bracket to keep this from coming out. But there's a better way than these flags right here. Plus, as you can see, they're kind of cheap, so they get torn pretty easily. So we've covered the 2 flags for the front of the tractor. We've covered the 2 flags for the back of the trailer. You also have to, on some loads of course, you have to flag the actual load. Sometimes it's just the widest point of the load. Sometimes it's the widest points on the front corners and the back corners. Every state is different, so you have to pay attention. But there's multiple different types of flags that you need to get. And you want to have options whenever you're mounting these flags, because sometimes, you know, this will work perfectly. I really like this specific flag when it actually works. The reason being because this bungee it's bungeed on itself, and it's not going to tear that flag. Plus, this is a little bit higher quality flag. It's not going to tear as much. When you're hooking up a bungee to just a plain old flag, which is the cheapest that you get, as you can see, there are grommets on it, like so. You can see that. There's grommets on it like so. Well, this flag's not even that old, and I've already ripped that grommet out. And that's because the amount of tension that you need on these flags to hold it there with the bungee, if you bungee it like this, it's gonna wind up tearing it. So, what I do is I actually prefer this style of flag. It has this nylon kind of cover, I guess, and it does have the two grommets. Well, zip ties are your best friend. And what I was talking about on the rear of the load, you can actually just zip tie this to that bracket, and that works perfectly fine. You know, you're legal as far as the size of the flag. I believe it has to be 18 inches. That'll cover you in all states, I think. And the zip ties, it's probably gonna work about 90% of the time, I would say. You're able to use zip ties. You just go through the grommet, zip tie it to, you know, to the actual load. You don't have to worry about the bungees falling off or ripping out or anything like that. It's gonna wind up staying. But you wanna have, we're talking bare minimum here. This is only gonna get you by, this is only gonna give you enough equipment to actually do the load. You're gonna need 4 of these for your actual load, and then I recommend 2 more for the back of the trailer. So that's at least 6. You wanna make sure that you have extra. I recommend carrying at least 2 extra, because stuff happens. You never know. I mean, a bird could hit the flag and rip it off. Whatever. I mean, anything can happen, or, you know, it just could be an old flag and it winds up ripping off itself. So make sure that you have extra, because you don't want to be caught out in the middle of Arizona somewhere or New Mexico and not have access to a flag. So make sure that you carry some extras. And you can see over my shoulder, you've got to have beacon lights. Now, beacon lights are supposed to be at the highest point on your tractor. So you gotta make sure that that beacon light is at least on the top of the tractor. I have seen some people put it on the headache rack and then have an extension up where it sits above the tractor. Some old school guys will just put the, I forget what they're called, but the dome looking beacons, they'll stick those on top of the mirrors. Technically, that's not gonna work even if you have it on both sides, because that light is not viewable up to 500 feet, 360 degrees. So, gotta make sure that it's actually on top of the tractor or visible above the tractor so you can see it 360 degrees. Also, the beacon needs to be a certain size, and I believe for most, at least 12 inches works, I think. I'm not 100% sure on that, so you'll have to double check, but I went with a little bit bigger beacon light up top, just so that way my bases were covered. One of these days I want to get a really big one, a really nice one. Obviously, the more visibility you have, the better off you're gonna be, the less accidents that are gonna happen. But for economic reasons or money, I went with that one right there, and that one works just fine. And of course, you're gonna need strobe lights for the back of the trailer. Now, I have the luxury of having mine built in, and I really like that option. I don't have to worry about wiring and unhooking that or forgetting that or what have you. The problem with that is this specific light, if you're running over length, that's not viewable. And then also, there are a couple of states, Tennessee, that might not recognize that, because the officer will walk up literally to the very, very rear of the trailer and say I can't see the lights. Now, should a car be tailgating you that close and not be able to see your strobe lights? Absolutely not. But rules are rules, I guess. So you do have to be wary of the states that you go into and just make sure that you know the rules, the laws, the regulations, what have you. But you are gonna need strobe lights for the back, and this right here, this setup is gonna work for nearly all of the states out there, and you're probably not gonna get messed with in Tennessee, but that's one thing, don't take my word for it. I'm not guaranteeing that. So yeah, I've covered my legal bases, I think. Then one last thing, if you're running at night, or if you have a certain over length, I don't do over length, so I don't know the rules here, but you will need beacons to go on the very end or on the widest points of the load if you're running at night. I also do not run at night. I don't carry those beacons, I don't like them. They do make, magnetic beacons. They make all different types, and you'll need those on the widest points of the load or the furthest point of the load, whatever type of load it is that you are running. You can see them, you can find them in the truck stops, probably most likely find them much cheaper online, but you can get your hands on those. You can wire them into the trailer. I like those. I think those are a little bit nicer. They also, a lot of times they're a lot brighter, but the ones that have the magnets on them, if they work for what you're hauling, like if you're hauling steel, I-beams that are over length, I mean, that's gonna work just fine. It's just gonna bink right there onto the load and you're gonna be good to go. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this gives you an idea of what you need or some tips to actually run these oversized loads. If you got some value out of it, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Hey, leave the comments down below if you know what you're doing. I certainly don't claim to know hardly anything about actually running oversized loads. What I've shared with you is stuff that people have shared with me or that I've learned so far in my very short journey in running oversized loads. But thank you so much. I appreciate each and every one of you. But as always, stay driven.